Tonight on Black Health Now, how to recognize a toxic friend. Let's hope it's not you. We also have some great and interesting cancer statistics that all Black people should know. Additionally, we're gonna have one woman's journey with Alzheimer's. And finally, 5 exercises that aren't working that most people do. All that and more tonight on Black Health Now with Doc and Dean.
Black Health Now, your weekly check-in on how your family can get and stay healthy. Joined by experts from around the world, here are Dr. Mike Lenore and Ellis Dean.
Well, we can't have a show called Doc and Dean without the doc himself. So let me introduce you to your asthma and allergy specialist and past NMA president, also known as Dr. Michael Lenore.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's good to be here. Enjoyed every week we come with what we consider the latest news around Black health issues. And so this is a big week. One of the problems that we're having now is we need to talk a little bit about COVID. I know you're tired of talking about COVID, but now they got this new vaccine that not many people are taking. What do you think, Mr. Dean? You think this is overkill?
No, I don't. I think it is. I think the media has moved on, and we tend to get too caught up in what the media tells us what's important. I think our health is important, but we have to be the drivers of that. And so COVID is still out there. There are hundreds of people that are dying each week. People are still catching COVID. And this latest booster, we're calling it a booster, but what they're calling it I had a conversation with the Office of Minority Health at CMS, and they're calling it an updated vaccine because this vaccine is pointing directly to the two most prominent strains, which is the BA4 and the BA5 variants. So I would encourage you, if you are eligible, to go get the updated vaccine. And while you're at it, you might as well go ahead and add that flu shot with it.
You know, I think what's disturbing to me is this country is willing to accept 430 people dying every day, 10,000 people worldwide as a success. I heard Biden say that President Biden say that the pandemic is over. But from my perspective, I'm not treating it that way. I'm still social distancing. I'm still avoiding unnecessary crowds, and I'm still wearing my mask. And I would advise those who are listening to us that if, in fact, you think you need a mask, you need one, and you should go ahead and wear it. I just think that it's very premature to say this is over. But hopefully there's a pause in the process. Obviously, the other thing we have to think about, there are other people talking about other variants. And so consequently, I think this last vaccine is a bit of a stretch for a lot of people. But I do think that from my perspective, from my own personal sake, I'm going to take every vaccine that they have out there because this is a very dangerous disease with unknown consequences. And while we're talking about that, I think it's still important for us to start to think about the flu vaccine, especially if you're over 65, you're African American, you're at high risk. I hate to say it. I mean, you're tired of being punctured and poked. You're tired of hearing about it. But not only do you need to consider the new vaccine for Omicron specific, but also you need to start thinking about the flu vaccine. But you have an interesting piece now on something called toxic friends. I got a lot of friends. I don't know if they're toxic. I don't have them as friends, but I want to see how you frame this. What are some of the characteristics of toxic friends?
Well, it's a great transition because we just talked about the toxicity of COVID, and now we're going to be talking about toxic friends. Back in the 80s, there was a hip hop group known as Houdini, and they had a song called Friends. How many of us have them? And so this piece is about finding those friends that aren't the best friends for you. So there are 5 characteristics of somebody that might be toxic, a friend that might be toxic in your life. So number 1 is they are needy. Okay. If you have somebody that they call you and they're texting you, and every time they call you or text you, they need something, that friend might be a sign of somebody that's toxic in your life because they're using you more than they're befriending you. The second thing is you avoid them. Right. And so that needy person that's always calling you like, I don't have time for this today. Okay. Would you just start hitting that ignore button on the call, or you wait a day or two to text them back? That might be the sign that friend that's in your life, or that person that's in your life, is toxic. The third thing is there's always conflict. Whether y'all have conflict when you're arguing about the smallest things, or when y'all go out together, they always have conflict with somebody else. So that toxic friend might be always causing a lot of chaos and conflict in your life. And we don't need that. You got to protect your peace in 2022. So if that's somebody that's always causing conflict, you might need to move them out of your life. Number 4, whiplash is the norm. And what is whiplash? Whiplash is y'all are friends one day and then you're not friends. You're friends one day, you're not the day. It's a start-stop relationship. And that means that this person is doing so much so you say, you know what, I got to cut you out. But then somehow they creep back into your life because you have defined them as your friend and you feel like you need to keep them in your life. Hey, if there's whiplash, put on a neck brace and keep it moving. And finally, trust is lost. So that's somebody that may have borrowed money from you and didn't pay you back. That person, may have tried to talk to your significant other behind your back, or may have talked about you behind your back, said some bad things about you behind your back, and they've broken your trust. When somebody breaks your trust, it's hard for them to get it back. And if they're not working diligently every day to get it back, you might want to let that person go. So those are the five characteristics. There's probably more, but 5 characteristics of somebody that might be toxic.
The OJs had a term for that last one called scandalizing your name. But what I don't understand, Alice, is I don't have, once I get friends that show any of those characteristics, I just eliminate them from my sphere of influence. I don't know. What is the danger of maintaining toxic friends?
Well, on the mild side, they get somebody that could just cause extra stress in your life that you don't need because you've already got enough life stressors. So protect your peace, as I said earlier. So that's on the mild side. On the more excessive side, that person, like that conflict, if y'all are out together, and that conflict can lead to fights and harm, danger. You could actually be put in danger by that toxic friend. That toxic friend could also, when that trust is lost, they could take your information and open up some credit. We've heard all kind of horror stories where they could just really kind of invade your life because you've let them into your life because you thought they were a friend and they have access to you and your information. True friends will protect you and your information even when you're not there. I would say, I'm going to keep saying it, protect your peace, get toxic people out of life, take inventory of the people in your life. And if they're not doing you good, or if they're not bringing some type of joy, they might need to be let go.
Well, I'm getting rid of 2 or 3 people tonight. So thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break right now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the cancer statistics that were just released by the American Cancer Society as it relates to Blacks. Obviously, some improvement, but no cause for celebration. We'll be right back. I'm Dr. Mike Lenoir with Top of Mind. Recently, President Biden suggested that the COVID-19 pandemic is over. I don't believe it. Unless you feel that 350 deaths in this country per week and 10,000 worldwide is enough success to relax. Most of us have moved on, and with each new vaccine, fewer and fewer people are taking this infection seriously. But just because the Omicron variant is not the killer that the Delta variant was, does not mean that a new variant will be less dangerous. I still suggest avoiding unnecessary crowds and wearing your mask sensibly. If you think you need it, you probably do. Please still consider getting vaccinated. And for more information, go to our website at aewellnessproject.org. Listen to our podcast at Black Doctors Speak. Black Doctors Speak on any podcast channel. Top of Mind is sponsored by the African American Wellness Project.
Welcome back. I hope you've been enjoying the program thus far. Before the break, Doc mentioned some interesting things about some cancer statistics that are important for Black folks. So, Doc, I want to know what's going on with cancer.
Well, the American Cancer Society introduced its report on cancer in African Americans, and no cause for celebration. From cradle to the grave, we are obviously more likely to die from cancer, be sick from cancer, than other ethnic groups. Little bit of interesting material as it relates to prostate cancer. It seems like we're doing a little bit better with that one, but from every other cancer, we're behind. The assumption always was that, well, it's our lifestyle. We didn't get the right food. We didn't do the right exercise. What's interesting to me is that Dr. Kim Rhodes has a different perspective on why African Americans do worse with cancer and other chronic disease. Let's see what she has to say.
I think it's very sexy to try to find a genetic reason, but I also think that plays into the overarching narrative, which is, oh, there's just something wrong with Black people. And if we can find it in their genes, then actually we don't need to do anything about it because you can't really change anyone's genes. So I'm more inclined, because those kinds of operations tend to reside in neighborhoods where there are high densities of African American people. I'm more interested in the DNA changes in the tumor rather than the person as a function of where people are living and what they're exposed to based on what is around them. So the next thing that I go to is what happens to and for Black people in the places where they get care when they present, for example, with an early stage cancer. Because when we look in California specifically, and this may actually be reflected in the national data as well, partly because California contributes so much to the national data. But when you compare an African-American woman and a white woman, or an African-American man and a white man presenting with the same stage of disease, so it's not more advanced, you will still find a persistence of a gap in terms of survival, that the white patients tend to do better. This is not physiological, that it's the same stage of disease. I've actually written papers where we modeled and compared. We said, okay, not only is it the same stage of disease, we're going to match these two people on everything besides race, including whether or not they have high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, and other things that can contribute to a poor outcome in cancer. And what we still find is that race looks like it's correlated with a worse outcome. So then you ask, well, what could be going on there? So the way I see it, the questions that I have asked, the papers that I have actually published in pancreas cancer, stomach cancer, colorectal cancer, acute myelogenous leukemia, is we're asking questions about where do people get their care? And we're also asking the question, if where you get your care determines what you get, and if what you get is appropriate to exactly the stage, to exactly the genetic makeup of your tumor, targeted therapy, if you get those things or not, those things appear to be correlated with survival. And in California, in the diseases that I just laid out, where we have published papers on this, what we have found is that Black people tend to cluster in the types of hospitals that may not have the high-end equipment, the precision medicine, the ability to do genetic testing on your tumor to see if there's a targeted therapy. So people get generic therapy. And if there is that kind of differentiation where there's an opportunity and a potential to have a good outcome, if you get the right coordinated precision medicine based care, what we see is that the outcomes are better.
Yeah, but I think the point that she makes is a point that I know as a doctor from the back room, from the doctor's lounge, is that if you go to a hospital that doesn't know exactly what they're doing and not doing all the latest stuff, you're not going to get the same outcomes. But what the VA has consistently proven in prostate cancer, breast cancer, other forms of chronic disease, is that if Black people start at the same starting line as white people, and they're able to run the race evenly, that their outcomes are pretty much the same. So it's not about the genetics, not about the lifestyle. Social determinants have something to do with it. But if you decide, if you've got a serious chronic problem, you need to hustle to someplace that knows what they're doing.
And in other news, water is wet and the sun is hot.
Well, that's one of them Southern things. That's about as simple as you can put it. Right, we've been talking a little bit about some of the chronic diseases. One of the diseases that impacts African Americans more often is Alzheimer's. But I'm not sure African Americans that we understand that Alzheimer's is different from senility and from dementia.
Yep.
And that recognizing when your parents are slipping into Alzheimer's, into certain kinds of memory issues, is difficult for a family. I know every time I lose my keys, my girls think, well, that's it. He's gone. I mean, they're lucky I remember their number. But we want to share with you one woman's story about how she dealt with Alzheimer's as her mother gradually slipped into the process. All right, to our Doc and Dean news group and our Wellness Watch, let me introduce you to Regina Polk Ross. She's a communications specialist who works in the Bay Area and really all across the country. Welcome to our program, Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Nice to be here.
You know, we're introducing Alzheimer's to our audience. I think for the African American community, they're always clear what Alzheimer's means. I want you to tell us your story about your interaction with your mom, how you came to understand what was going on, where you start solutions. So let me just start with the first question. When was the first time you noticed that something was wrong?
So, fortunately for me, it was sort of a collective effort, amongst my siblings. But there were a few things we noticed. One, my mother repeating things. Two, losing or misplacing important documents and, financial items like ATM cards, losing them. And then just an overall feeling of, she wasn't there. She wasn't herself. And so that was sort of, an initial series of red flags that we all noticed.
Was there one event that triggered probably more concern than the others and made you decide that you had to seek additional diagnostic help?
Yeah, so I think it was definitely some of the financial aspects. So losing checkbooks and ATM cards multiple times. And that's obviously a concern for many reasons, but not only that, that she lost them, but, her experiencing distress from losing them was very concerning.
So what did you do then? I mean, who did you see? You know, the average time you take to a primary care doc, a lot of times you're going to hear, well, they're just getting old, and this is just part of it.
Right.
What did you do to seek help, and what would you recommend other people do in the same situation?
Right. So I think in the sort of research space, and I'm a marketing professional, so my job is to try to translate, scientific ideas to a lay audience so that people can take action and take better charge of their health. So, one of the things that I did or that we did was that we said we needed mom to have a consultation. Now, it's very interesting because, where I start is my niece saying what happened to grandma. And so even my niece, who was 6 years old at the time, noticed a difference. And, a second point is that when memory loss or issues with thinking affects your daily activities, that's when it's time to see a health professional. So that's exactly what happened. And so, I was in California, my mother was in Houston, siblings elsewhere. I set up a consultation for her. Right. So I think it's interesting because I think people assume that primary care doctors can do all and treat all. But there are definitely some circumstances when a specialist is needed. And that's why I sought out, I did the searches myself. What resources are there in Houston to look at memory problems? And so I sort of, talked to my mother's primary care doctor. Um, who said, yeah, she needs some further, she needs further examination. And I found this university center that had a center on aging, and they actually test for and do diagnosis of memory issues.
You know, from your experience, most people feel that as you get older, you just start forgetting things. And senility and dementia and Alzheimer's are all the same. What did you learn about the differential there?
One of the biggest things I learned is one, Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia. So Alzheimer's disease is characterized by decline in the brain tissue. But dementia, which is memory loss that affects your everyday living, can be caused by a stroke. It can be caused by brain tumor. It can be caused by other diseases. So Alzheimer's disease is a particular type of dementia that is characterized by damage to the brain tissue. And that's one of the big things I learned. And the other thing is that, losing your memory to the extent that it affects your life is not normal. So it's one thing to, forget someone's birthday. It's another thing to drive someplace and not know where you are or why you're there. That is an area that would need further examination.
Yeah, do you think that in most instances there is some with dementia, there's some preceding medical event like a stroke or like a mini stroke? And I know that you've had a chance to kind of investigate some of these things. In your experience, how can someone tell?
It's interesting because it's usually the partner or the family member that notices. Now, one of the things as I reflect back on my mother, and it gives me cause to pause, is that, I wonder what she was thinking. I wonder when she realized things weren't right. And, that's something that I will think about, from now until. But it's usually a close family member or partner who notices things. And because of their concern, they want to find out what's going on with their loved one.
So when you got this evaluation in Houston, what were some of the diagnostic things that people can do to differentiate the various forms of dementia from Alzheimer's or subtypes of dementia?
Right. So in general, there are several diagnostic tools that are used by researchers that have been vetted and proven. One is like it asks you about your finances. There's another tool that has to do with, do you feel like your memory is better, worse, or the same as a year ago? And so there's a whole battery of questions that can be used. So this particular office that I took my mother to, they use those diagnostic tools, but it became pretty apparent as we went through the tools that my mother did have some memory loss. And one of the issues and one of the reasons why I do the work I do to get more people involved in research is that historically you could only, really diagnose Alzheimer's disease post-mortem, so after the person died. And so now, as we make advances, as we do more research, we can diagnose it earlier. And for now, we can at least try to make some lifestyle changes to impact or prolong the progression of the disease. But the goal would be to have a cure.
When my mother was diagnosed with dementia, she was very resistant to that diagnosis. I mean, she fought it and fought it, and she became very angry. And I
Yeah.
think I've seen that happen in many instances. In your experience, is that a common response of the individual who has this problem?
Well, absolutely. It's frustration. It's that sense of loss for the individual. And I can imagine that my mother was probably had a great deal of stress and worry, knowing, I don't, what's going to happen with her. And I will never forget that process. We had two appointments at that doctor's office. And I remember when the doctor said, okay, your mother definitely has dementia. She can't drive anymore. She shouldn't live alone. And my mother was sitting there listening to the diagnosis. So, that's something that I will never forget. And there was a look of devastation on her face for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done a lot of research on the issues around getting African Americans involved in clinical trials.
Mhm.
And I know this is a particularly difficult space because I don't think we've really quite defined Alzheimer's for the Black community, so they kind of understand what the differences are in the various forms of memory loss as you get older.
Mhm.
One of the things that we've seen, or that I continue to see, is that there's hesitancy on the part of the African American community
Right.
to get engaged in these things. And paradoxically, it's not about Tuskegee. It's really
Right.
more about the recent involvement that they've had with the healthcare system, which is so
Right.
negative that they don't want to get engaged. But why? I mean, we've talked about it many times, but let's go over it again. Why is it important for African Americans to get involved, especially in this particular disease, and how can they get involved?
Right. So absolutely. So again, first and foremost, as it applies to Alzheimer's disease, we need to be able to study the progression of the disease as opposed to, looking at a person's brain after they've passed away. So the more that we can observe and study in the progression of the disease, the closer we'll get to more treatments and we'll be able to accelerate those treatments. The second thing is that, the one of the most expensive parts of doing research is recruiting human subjects. And so as much as there are, distrust in the community, we also want to be part of the solution. And to be part of the solution, we have to volunteer and be a part of research.
Wow, Doc, that it was a fascinating story, and I'm really praying for her and her family on her journey. I would like to point out that we are doing a 6-part series on Alzheimer's and memory loss here on blackdoctor.org in conjunction with our partners at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. So if you want to go back and you want to learn about the differences, as Doc was talking about, in Alzheimer's versus dementia versus senility versus just normal, memory loss as we get older, as we age, or ways to maintain our mental functioning as we get older, I suggest you go check out that series. It's very, very fascinating and has a lot of great information for you.
Because every time I've been down to the gym, people walking around with their shirt off, lifting stuff, doing stuff. And you have a segment that says some of these exercises that I always thought were not the right things to do, or at least I couldn't do them. I always thought they were harmful to you. But you're going to kind of clear that up for us. We'll be right back. We'll be right back after this break. I'm Dr. Mike Lenore with the Health Tip of the Day. Black women go more often to the doctor for cervical cancer screening, but have lower rates of being informed of an abnormal pap smear and contacted for follow-up treatment. This results in a delay in the diagnosis and treatment of several cervical conditions, especially cervical cancer. When you get a test from a doctor, make sure that at the next doctor visit, you ask for the result and what the next move should be. This message is sponsored by the African American Wellness Project. All right, Mr. Dean, I'm gonna turn it over to you. I'm how I feel about exercising. I want to do something steady, but I don't want to kill myself trying to do them. You've got a series of exercises that people do commonly that don't really seem to help too much. So let's turn it over to you.
No, this is an interesting article. If you want to find the article, it is also on blackdoctor.org underneath our fitness section. But I just want to kind of point out there are 5 exercise moves that are common that people do that really don't work. And I'm going to give you some reasons why these exercises don't work. Number 1 is sit-ups and crunches. Yes, we all try to sit there. I've seen grabbing our neck and doing those crunches. Now, if you're trying to trim your belly and you're trying to tighten your abdominal area, those sit-ups and crunches really don't work. What you need to be doing, and the reason why they don't work is you've got to get rid of that fat. So to get rid of that fat is more about diet and just kind of overall cardio exercises as it does versus sit-ups and crunches. And so if you want to work your abdominal region, what you really should be doing is like a plank at 15-second intervals, and then you come down. If you want to do a crunch, you do a crunch and you hold it for 10 to 15 seconds, then you come back down. That's going to be a better exercise for your abdominal region versus just slinging your body up and down or doing that neck pull that we do with those sit-ups and crunches. The second exercise is tricep kickbacks. How many times have you seen people leaned over that bench and they've got that weight in their hand and they're just banging away? It looks like a hammer, or they're just wanging away. Basically, the short version is you won't have enough weight on that, and you won't do enough kickbacks in order to have an impact on your triceps that you want to in the amount of time that you have allotted. So really you should be doing overhead pulls and other tricep exercises that are better for you. So that kickback, kick it out. Number 3, stretching without first warming up. Now, I know a lot of people, when they go to the gym, that's the first thing what they do. They start, stretching, and I'll admit it, I'm guilty of it. I was doing those stretches too before I started warming up. But you realize when you start stretching cold muscles, it's like stretching a cold rubber band. You're actually going to diminish your workout capacity because the muscles haven't been warmed up. You should do a light warm up, whether it's a brisk walk, some jumping jacks, things of that nature, to get the heart rate going, get the blood pumping throughout the body, to get those muscles activated. Then you stretch, and then you do your workout. So we've been doing it wrong. Look, I'm right there with you. I was stretching first and then trying to do a warm up. So you should warm up first, then stretch, then do your full workout. Number 4, using those hand weights while you're walking. And I know we've all seen those ball walkers or those people walking around our neighborhood, and they got those hand weights. You say, "Oh, I love her determination and her dedication, or his dedication." No, because statistically it shows that people walk slower when they have those hand weights, and it really doesn't do anything for the body. If you want to move your arms, you could just take the hand weights out, move move your arms back and forth, and walk at a more brisk pace. That's going to give you a better results than those hand weights, those 2 or 3 pound hand weights. Number 4, the cardio machine, sort of, right? So a lot of times we get on the stair climber, we get on the cardio, we get on the elliptical, and we work ourselves. We get to the end, we're almost exhausted. And what do we do right after we get done? We hunch over, we grab the machine, and it breaks our posture. Over time, that is detrimental because you really do that workout. What you really should be doing is at the end of those workouts, and I know that's hard because you're tired, is try to stand up, engage your core, and get your body in a better position for after you do that hard cardio. Because if you start hunching over and grabbing the machine and doing all these other things, that is actually taking away from the exercise that you just did. And finally, I got a bonus for you, Doc. This right here, you know what I'm saying? This area right here, I want this area to go down. So you just start working that one area. That doesn't work. Fat comes off your body in a uniform way. So just continue to make sure if you're exercising, it's all about diet, sleep. You got to do all of it. You have to exercise, you got to move, you got to think, you got to sleep well. You've got to do all of these things in order to have a slim, trim physique.
Well, I'm glad you brought some attention to that, because first thing I did was buy a bunch of outfits, blue, red. So when I went to the gym, I was looking pretty good. And I thought I was in pretty good shape because I'd been running a long time. Till a guy asked me to do a few push-ups. I'm not going to tell you what that turned out to be, but I think a lot of times what you need to do is, if you're interested in exercising on that kind of serious tone, you need to get a personal trainer.
Yes.
I mean, someone who understands exactly what you're.
Yeah, I totally agree with that in terms of getting a personal trainer, Doc. I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
I think at least getting some consultations, some advice, because as we age, our body's needs change over time. And so working with a personal trainer, they can make those adjustments for us. They can help us make those adjustments in our exercise as well as in our diet. So as our body's aging, we can move gracefully into it instead of trying to do stuff that we used to do in our 20s, trying to do that when we're, getting a little bit more seasoning.
Yeah. I was a little disappointed. I just left from Hawaii, and I committed to going to Hawaii, being able to take off my T-shirt. But, I took my T-shirt off, and my wife said, "Look, you got your T-shirt off." So I knew that I hadn't achieved my goal. But I think one of the interesting things, though, is about the stretching thing. A lot of people believe you should exercise and then stretch. No, you should exercise and then stretch. But a lot of people believe that you should stretch and then exercise. A lot of times, if you don't exercise first, those muscles are not loose enough.
Right.
And the stress can cause injuries. So thank you for, I always knew a lot of stuff was unnecessary. Thank you for supporting my philosophy of this. All right, so our time has gone by pretty quickly again. We've talked a little bit about COVID. We talked certainly about toxic friends. I'm calling a few people when this is over. I want you to understand what Dr. Kim has had to say about the whole issue of why we do support it with cancer. I talked a little bit about our journey on Alzheimer's that many of you are about to take, especially if you have older parents and grandparents. And finally finished up with my prejudices against exercise of the type that I've seen in gyms. I think this is.
I didn't tell you not to exercise, though, Doc. I want folks to be very clear about that. I didn't tell you not to exercise. Get your behind up and go exercise.
Well, I believe that. I'm exercising every day. I mean, I have the stuff in my. I haven't had the stuff in my home, so I don't have any excuse for not doing it. But I do think that too often, too many of us do the wrong exercise. So I want to thank you for joining us today on this issue of Doc and Dean. Every week we'll be here talking about the latest information and some other issues that I think you need to be engaged in. So thank you, Mr. Dean, for what you've given us in terms of information. But I'd like to thank most of you for joining us on this week's edition of Doc and Dean. We want you to stay with us, share it with your friends. I want you to remember, health is your biggest asset, so protect it.